Hello, everyone. This is another episode of On Average MD. I'm your host, Dr. Isabelle Amig. And today, I'm very excited to bring to you Leticia Dourado. She is a pulmonary specialist and she's very active on social media. And that's where I met her and we became friends over Twitter. And she is remarkable in her approach to medicine and her approach to science. And I'm so excited for you guys to meet her. I think we're going to have a wonderful conversation. Leticia, thank you so much for being here. Do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. So thank you, Isabel, for having me here. It's a pleasure to be in your podcast. So, as you said, I am a pulmonologist. I am specialized in interstitial lung diseases, which outside of the scientific world, we call it like pulmonary fibrosis. Most of the diseases evolve with pulmonary fibrosis. I also have training in critical care, and so I wear these both hats. And in science, I also wear two hats. I do primary research in interstitial lung diseases and in critical care. And as a secondary researcher, I work with guideline development. So this is a little bit of me from the professional perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Yeah, you're definitely an accomplished physician and scientist. It's really wonderful to see all of the things that you've created in the last several years that I've followed you on Twitter. But the way we really connected was when I shared my story of having cancer and saying how much help I had had from non-traditional medicine. And you were very vulnerable and very generous of your time and energy sharing your own story. And if you could share your story with our auditors, that would be wonderful, because I think there's so much to learn from what you have gone through.
So yes, before I start on my story, I would like to say that I feel that modern medicine misses a lot in terms of a holistic approach to treating people. So I think we're getting better and better at treating diseases, understanding the pathogenesis and pathway mechanisms. But I truly think that taking care of the person that is going through that process, that disease, is not really, how can I say that? I don't know if in every medical school, but this is not really well taught in most of the schools. So a lot of things we end up learning on our lives, or we don't learn at all. And in my case, now going to my story, I graduated from med school in 2002. In 2010, 8 years after graduation, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. And she went through a very challenging and hurtful process of being diagnosed and treated, because this is all very hard, especially when you know that treatments will prolong life with quality for a while, but the expectation is a medium survival of, let's say, 2 to 4 years. And that's exactly what happened to her. She died 4 years later after the diagnosis. And throughout this process, I don't wish that to anyone, honestly, but that's where I learned the most about taking care of people, because I was there as a family member. You know, I was the daughter in the hospital room, listening to hospital staff talking loudly at night, or wearing noisy shoes, walking around, because sleeping is very hard in the hospital. And Also, well, I could list a long list of things that when we are on the other side, we start realizing that we should be more mindful of the person that is there. And this is, I am just coming from the border, the outside to the inner thing, because I'm just talking now about stuff like outside stuff that happens in the environment and that impacts the well-being of the patients. But then there is this challenge of dealing with the threat to life. So my mom had to deal herself with it, but us as family, we also had to deal with the threat of losing her, the fear of losing her, and having our minds in the future, and the future looking kind of gray, dark. That was, I could say, almost unbearable. And to be honest, it was unbearable because I did have some panic attacks. And the panic crisis is exactly that, right? It's like your body, it's like you cannot stand it. And then you have that attack out of the blue, and it's not out of the blue, it's there is something there underneath that's going on. And anyway, it was very, very hard, and I needed the help of medication, which was excellent, but it's not the solution. So you really need to expand from that place. Otherwise, it's, I don't know, it's unbearable, I would say. And that happened to me, so, and to complicate things, in my case, all of that was happening while I was pregnant of my first child. So my mom died when my son was 9 months. That means that during my pregnancy, she was in the end of her journey. And for a cancer patient, that means that she was, I don't remember now, but third, fourth line of treatment. Treatments are not really efficient anymore. So it's not like in the first line that she really felt well and she could return to her life. She would have the treatment and not really feel very well. And the balance between benefits and toxic effects from chemo started to weight much more for the side effects, for like being heavy on the body. And that was really, really hard to see that happening. And then she died, and I was in the middle of all of those emotions, like being pregnant. It was my first child. I was afraid of many, many things, and also happy. But then my mom, and I could not take medications because I was pregnant. And that's when I started searching, and I found some comforting resources in Buddhism, in meditation, in mindfulness, in loving kindness practices. And that was really a relief, because then it was not a drug that could harm the baby I was carrying. And it was something I could do to help me be there in that situation that was so challenging. And I wish at that time so much I could have had something like some drug, some magic pill that could take me out of all the emotional suffering I was going through, but I could not. And that's when I started, and it was back like 8 to 9 years ago. And it was a gentle revolution for me. I will pause now just to hear a little bit from you.
Yeah, I love that word, gentle revolution. It's beautiful. Gentle revolution, I'm writing it down. That happened after something very traumatic. And it's really interesting when you're talking about a cancer diagnosis. And I think as physician, I don't know for you, when my mom had been diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer. It's funny because I didn't know at the time that she was BRCA. We didn't put it together much later. But she got diagnosed when I was training medical school, and I was actually learning about breast cancer. And then she's getting diagnosed. And at that time, I realized being a doctor was not helpful, because and it's really, I had this really real realization. It took me like, a lot of tears and a lot of fears and a lot of panic attack the same way, right? Like your mom is your everything, especially when they're strong. and I remember thinking, hold on, I'm already putting my mom in the grave, when the only reason I know all of those possibilities and everything that it's in the book, it's because I'm looking at the patient from the moment that I diagnose them until the end, because I need to know this as a physician. As a daughter, I need to give her my support. But, I was pretty young. I was like in my 20s, and I didn't know. I was overwhelmed with fear. And, having been a cancer patient myself now, I can tell you that it's almost, in a way, there is something that's a little bit easier being the patient, because you're not thinking of anyone else than you. I mean, you're thinking of other people, but you realize pretty soon that they're all going to be fine. No one really needs, everyone is going to be fine, right? And so then you're really concentrated on you. I think when you're a caregiver, and that sounds like that's what it was, you're trying to remove the stress and you're trying to remove the fear of your loved one. And that's really hard.
And you know what? We don't receive training to be a caregiver.
No, we do not.
An emotional caregiver, because I would say that's the hardest task. So in general, what I see, what I saw with my mom, and then I read, I'm going to tell you the book I read that I found it was fantastic. It's a messy process. So to be close to someone that is suffering and in fear of a life threat, and you also feel that threat, and how to be there, how to have the perfect word or the perfect act, like the moment to hold, the moment to give her some space. This happens in movies, but in real life, it's really messy and you get things wrong. And I think what is really important is to be connected with the intention, which is to help, to love, to be there, to apologize. Sometimes maybe you didn't say the perfect word, or the person didn't really want to hear that at that moment, and be kind with yourself and the others. That this is messy, we don't know how to navigate this. And about the book I read that put finally the caps on all of this, because I felt, oh my gosh, I did this wrong, I did that wrong. It was the 5 invitations from Frank Ostaseski. He's the founder of the Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco. It's been like 20 or 30 years ago. And he has this experience with the dying, because they go to the hospice to die. And then he shares his experience in this book. And this book is so deep and so connected. It's amazing. So yes, I agree with you that it's probably the position of the caregiver is the hardest, especially because you have this thing in your mind that you have to have the strength. You cannot have a breakdown or meltdown, because you have to be strong for the other. And your sleep is deprived, and your emotions, but it doesn't matter, because the person who is suffering is not you, is the other one. It's your mother or your child or your spouse or whatever. So and also the worst, caregivers are neglected. Like when they go to consultations, all the attention is to the patient, right? The patient well-being, what are the patient needs, etc., etc. So it's really, really, really hard.
I'm with you. I think that's exactly right. The caregiver is usually, very often, completely neglected. Yeah, that's a really powerful statement, but it's so true. I think as physicians, we all know that we usually spend our time looking at the patient.
And after I went through this process with my mom, I started to pay attention to the caregivers. So of course I was concerned with the patient, but then I would always dedicate some time. And even if it was not possible during the consultation, sometimes I would say, come you alone, come
All
talk to
right.
me, because I want to know how things are working, how you're managing all of that. If you need help, it's possible that you might need help. It's not easy to be so to help the person acknowledge that it's not easy. And if you need help, you need to seek help. Otherwise, if the caregiver breaks down, then there is no one to care, right, for the
Mhm.
for the patient.
Mhm. So I have a more specific question. So can you tell us a little bit what you do or what you started doing when you did mindfulness? And you mentioned Buddhism, but really meditation. But what do you do? How do you meditate?
Okay. So at that time, you can imagine with a pregnant, in the end of the pregnancy, my mom was sick, and then I had a baby. I couldn't go to classes, like to
Mhm.
meditation classes, because there are meditation classes. And if so, for people that are considering starting meditation and they can go to a class, I would recommend, because then you connect, there's the
Yes.
community, and it's easier. But I could not. So I
Yeah.
started online, and I found three excellent teachers online. So one, I would say the most important one was Pema Chodron. So she's a Buddhist monk from United States. Yes, from United States. Then Tara Brach. She's a psychologist, but then she went into Buddhism. And the third one is an Australian monk, Ajahn Chah, and he's awesome. I really like his style. So the three of them, they have different styles, and I started watching their in Buddhism, they call Dharma. So the Dharma is their reflections about life,
Mhm.
about what really is on our hearts. And I cannot think of the practice of meditation detached from Dharma, because how can you settle your mind to enjoy the present moment, to be there with your breath, if you are completely uneasy about anger, frustration, fear? So if you don't address these emotional states, it's not possible to meditate. So then I coupled them too, as the Buddhist practice does. So I would listen to a Dharma, and I would choose, because they have the topics. So anger, desire, attachment, grief, loss. So depending on my mood, I need this today. And I would listen to that, and then I would sit to meditate. And I say it was a gentle revolution, because I didn't see it happening. It's not something that you're like, oh, I feel. It was not. But little by little, first I enjoyed what I was doing, because it really, it was something comforting to my heart,
Yeah.
and I felt good. So I
Mhm.
just continued doing. And then when time passed by, like not little time, but like 1 year, 2 years, and then 3 years, I started noting myself calmer, happier, and less prone to negativity.
Mhm.
So it's not that I don't suffer. So of course the suffering is there out in the world. So yes, my heart aches with suffering, but there is no secondary suffering derivated from the original suffering that comes from a bunch of stuff that our mind produces that is really unhelpful, and can lead us into depression, anxiety, etc., etc. So I have a much more emotionally stable existence I can say.
Yeah.
And even for advocacy, you have seen me on Twitter. I advocate for more fairness and justice in the world. When you're out there advocating, you get backlash, and you get some mean words, that people,
Yeah.
they're not enjoying your advocacy. And the more I was into Buddhism, meditation, loving kindness, the more serene, in peace I was. So
Yeah.
yes, and depending from where it came, some people that I would admire or something, of course, that hurt. And I would feel, the pain of not belonging to that tribe, to that group. But it was just pain. I could stay with that. I could be kind to that. And I could think in my heart, what am I doing? Is this advocacy authentic? Is it something that I want to stand for? The answer is yes. I continue. And so this is the gentle revolution that I mean. And
Yeah.
I really wish that everyone in the world could have access to that, because for me it was such a transformation, Isabel. If you met me like, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, I was such a hostage of anxiety, so concerned about what people are thinking of me, and I need to please them because I need to belong, because if I don't belong, I'm going to, I don't know.
It's interesting what you mentioned this. I've always thought that it's thanks to the cancer that I discovered myself and started practicing loving kindness. Um, I had a friend that mentioned this. She's like, it's when we are uncomfortable that we grow. And this is so true, right? Like when you're uncomfortable, you can grow. If you're not uncomfortable, you just stay, where you are. You get stuck. And so then you have those, you put yourself in uncomfortable situation, or life just throws at you something uncomfortable. And I really felt that having cancer for me really allowed me to love myself. But more and more, I realized that it's because I went and I did a lot of meditation that I started loving myself. It really took that time to really realize, like, what's really, like, who am I really, like, deep down inside, when I'm not trying to please anyone, when I'm not trying to do what I think other people want of me, which is, by the way, completely built. It's not true. you know, um, like my mom just wants me to be happy, but I had this feeling that, oh, she wants me to be like this successful person, and like, what does success means? And then you're like, oh, success means like papers published and being in a big institute and so on. And then you start, thinking more and sitting in silence, or at least trying to sit in silence, because I don't know for you, but my mind is loud. And I have like a ping pong tennis match between my two brains. This is working. No, it's not. No. It can be really, it's actually entertaining at one point. You're like, okay, are you going to stop? but I hear you. I think that's slowly I started just being more kind to myself and being much more true to really who I really was. And I cannot really explain it to anyone, which is like, it sounds so silly to say, just sit down and start breathing and just try to pause all of your thoughts. And it's when you say that, people are like, there's no way I can do this. And you're like, well, you just have to practice. And they're like, what do you mean? Like, practice. And at one point you will sit in those thoughts, and you don't have to follow each of those thoughts. You can just let them pass and just be like, oh, they're there. Okay. And when it comes to fear, I had a lot of fear, fear of dying, fear of not, having to deal with this forever. And I remember meditation for me was exactly what you're saying, which is like loving kindness, which is just pause and what am I really afraid of? Well, I mean, we are all going to die at one point, right? So if I agree with this, then what am I really afraid of? And then you start realizing that there's a lot of construct. And
You know what?
just pause.
That really
Yeah.
reminds me of something that Tara Brach said. It's very
Mhm.
interesting. There is this author, it's Carlos Castaneda. She
Mhm.
mentioned his book. I didn't have the chance yet to read it, but he says, let your death be your advisor,
Yeah.
because
Good.
all the pettiness falls away.
Yes. Totally.
And I think that, like, we're discussing here from different perspectives, myself from a caregiver and
Yeah.
yourself like having had the experience yourself, but
Mhm.
we both seem to have been advised by death.
Yes,
We
absolutely.
let death touch our
Mhm.
shoulder and
Mhm.
say, look what's really important in life.
Yes.
Because and then when you feel this touch, you're like, wait a minute,
Yes.
wait a minute.
And
This
the
is
ego.
silly. This is
Yes.
silly. This
Yes.
is important. I'm
Yes.
gonna keep it.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Exactly. No, no, no. I'm just thinking that it's exactly that. You know what's funny, Vo, is as physician, we see death every day. I mean, not in rheumatology. In rheumatology is wonderful. But I remember at one point I did go through trainings in cancer, and you're skewed. Your vision is skewed because you're in a hospital ward. So the hospital ward are where it's the worst usually, and that's not real life. But it's funny because I feel like I've been in contact with death all of my life, but I've feared it. And I think one of the reasons I became a doctor was to go against death.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly being touched, and for me, my cancer was very loving. There was no threat whatsoever in this cancer, which is very strange, but I think it's the loving kindness there. But I agree with you. I think it just allowed me to be like, okay, hold on, what is important? What is important? And sorry, I want you to share what you were going to share, and I stopped you.
No, I'm really enjoying to hearing what you have to say. And you know what? I think when we are as physicians encountering death in the hospital wards, I would say, at least from my perspective, I was most of the time numb to it. So
Oh,
it was a rational encounter. It was not an embodied
yeah,
encounter.
I see what
Like
you're saying.
when we say, yes, it's true, we all are going to die. When I acknowledge that with reasoning, with with
Mhm.
my mind, I can even speak about that and don't feel my heart accelerate.
Yeah.
But when we embody the idea of finitude, that's when the things get hard. That's when we go to places that scary us.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's when, and then Tara Brach says something that I really like, which is when we meet fear, depending on the level of fear you're experiencing, it's not mindfulness that you need. You need some nurturing first. So you need to reconnect to love, to belonging, because that's when you will be able to face fear, because fear is about disconnecting, it's about annihilation. Is so if it's too high, the level of fear,
Hmm.
you need some practices of nurturing that she teaches. Pema Children teaches to what are the practices of nurturing, that you regain some sense of belonging, of love inside yourself, and then you can then face fear. And that's my main criticism to the way mindfulness has been incorporated in the West.
Hmm.
So if you see the practices of mindfulness that are completely detached from wisdom,
Hmm.
life wisdom, that the Buddhism call dharma,
Yes.
that's why it doesn't work. Because if you put someone that is in great stress, like a huge fear, or having suicidal thoughts, or thinking that life's not worth anything, like depressive, and then you offer mindfulness, the person is going to be mindful of all of that, but without any resource
Hmm.
to deal with it. So you need nurturing. You cannot jump into mindfulness depending on what you're going through. So that's, for me, it's very, very clear. And I'm like, oh, of course. I was, the other day, I just saw that it was, someone tweeted, it's, oh, the study testing mindfulness in troubled adolescents in the district, blah, blah, failed terribly. In fact, the adolescents got worse. And I'm like, yes, because if you don't offer any kindness, so there are two wings. For you to fly, you need two wings. You need mindfulness, but you need love, strong love. If you don't have love, mindfulness will likely be of no use.
I love that you say this. I'm about to open a practice, and the reason I'm leaving institution, and I loved my institution. I still love it, but then I was like, no, I want to offer the best of me, and it took me so much time. It took me a cancer to realize I love my patients. I actually love them, and I want them to feel that, so that they have this, right? Like they have this, like, they may not love themselves. And a lot of my patients don't love themselves. Maybe they feel that they deserve to be in pain. Maybe they feel that they deserve what's happening to them. Maybe it's
Yes.
really inside. And I know, as a former patient, I guess I'm still a patient, but I remember that that's how I felt. I did not feel that I was worth. I did not feel worthy. I didn't feel belonging. And I just realized, I was like, wow, like the most important thing that I can offer my patient isn't my training of 17 years, isn't the research that I do, isn't all of this. Like the most important thing that I can offer my patient is the love that I have for them. And that was just this, wow, fulfilling, like a really fulfilling moment of my life, where I was like, I'm going to practice medicine on my terms. And I'm going to practice it like fully, where it doesn't matter if it's placebo. I don't think it's just placebo anyway, but I will offer them my love, and then we can build from there. And so then I don't tell them, by the way, I love you, right? But I think that there is this nurturing, and I agree with you. I think that if you don't offer this to people in general, like, how can they love themselves? And I think that those hate email or hate, social media posts, I always wonder, I was like, do they love themselves, or do they not? Like, how can we make sure that people realize we're all together in this?
And you know what? That's so interesting. That reminds me of what Pema Children says, that compassion always start with self-compassion.
Yes.
So you cannot offer true compassion,
Yes.
engage in a loving relationship, if you don't have that for yourself.
Yeah.
And this is not about being selfish, but it's about being able to forgive yourself, to be kind to yourself. And when that starts to happen, then you start to be able to do the same for others.
Yes.
And then as you practice, this is like a muscle, it grows. You become more skilled at doing that. And I can say I enjoy that so much. And then I learned that there is indeed a loop in our brains. It's like oxytocin. So when you love the world, when you love people, when you are like spreading out love, you really, like being generous, you get like a boost of neurotransmitters that now I don't remember exactly which one they are, but they give you like this, like feeling good. So yeah, so this is what I call wise selfishness, because it's like, it's by doing good to yourself and others, you feel good, and it's addictive. So it's like, wow, this feels good, and well, I want to do that. Yes. And this makes other people feel good. And then it's interesting, because then that also cuts completely that sense of threat, the others and myself, like, no, you belong. It's a community. You belong. You're able to love. You're able to love the world. You're able to love the planet, nature. And then you start expanding. And then fear gets this little, because the opposite of fear is love.
Yes. Agreed. Agreed. So tell me, Leticia, just so you said, okay, so I listen to a Dharma, a topic, and then what do you do? Do you sit down? Do you do
Yes,
walking meditation? What do you do?
yes. So most of these years, just now I've been starting walking meditation, which I don't find easy. I find very hard.
I
Each
think it's
one of
hard.
us, we need to learn what are the senses we have. They're the best anchors. It's not for everybody the same. So for example, for myself, when I close my eyes and I get completely distracted, and that makes my thoughts go even wider. Like
Okay.
for me, if I keep my eyes open and I fixate on a certain point, that really, really helps to calm down my mind. So I still get thoughts, but they're like not really sticky thoughts, because some thoughts are just like a movie, like you get into the thought, and when you see it's like 30 minutes and you have been in the thought. This is really sticky thought. I mean, like real, like gentle thoughts. So
Mhm.
so I get that. So first, Dharma, calm down. So what is the theme of the day? What is really getting me? So am I angry? Am I fearful? Am I whatever? Then I practice that, and then I go into a calm moment of stillness, where for me needs to be eye open, not closed. For me,
Mhm.
I discovered that years later, because usually the instruction are close your eyes, blah 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 blah. For me, it needs to be eyes open. I practice that every day. Every day. It doesn't matter if it's like, if I have just 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes. And
Mhm.
depending, well, sometimes emotions are really, really strong and I am not feeling good. I tell my husband, hey, I really need to take care. Could you hold on things for me, kids, the house, so I can go to my place? And then sometimes it's like 2 hours. So I
Wow.
listen to 1 hour Dharma, like I really go deep into the subject, 1 hour Dharma, and then I stop, and then it's like I've been 2 hours. Another thing that I usually do also, for me, I have a very, very how can I say that? I wake up very easily. My
If it's
sleep
light
is not really good. And when I wake up, because I'm anxious, sometimes I wake up and it takes a while for me to get back to sleep. And the quality of my sleep has always been terrible, and I've always suffered from that. But then when I started meditating, you know what I did? I was like, well, okay, I am in the middle of the night, everybody's sleeping, so perfect.
yeah.
So then I started using that time to practice, and then I stopped fearing that I would wake up tired and I didn't sleep. So the second
Mhm.
suffering that happens, it
Yeah.
stopped. Then it was just that moment.
Yeah.
And then I started realizing that even though I didn't sleep, I was feeling okay. So the problem was really suffering because I was that person that doesn't sleep well, that
Yeah.
wakes up in the middle of the night and takes 1 hour to get back to sleep, and blah blah blah. Like being mean to myself, judgmental, and all of that. So I also use that to meditate when I wake up in the middle of the night and my mind is a bit like, wow, okay, time to sit, let me practice. So always a dharma to get me into the mood. It's like tuning, like you find the tune. So
Mhm.
a dharma to get me into the mood, and then I practice. If I don't sleep, okay, but sometimes I do sleep with that,
Mhm.
and the quality of my sleep really improved, even though I continue being me. So I wake up very easily.
I love it. I love this. I think that's so powerful to give some tools, for everyone really when you're sleeping and you're afraid that it's not going to be okay. Like when we were giving our test, in medical test, that was like the moment where you're like, I need to sleep, and you're like, no, I can't. Like, okay, that's okay. So that's great. I'd like to finish on a history of hope, because on Average MD, it's hope driven by science. Do you have any history of patients where you feel that the mindfulness and the loving kindness has really helped them? Because we heard about your own experience, maybe a little bit mine. Do you have any sort of a history that comes to your mind where you're like, oh, I have this patient and No.
Let me think here. I always, so what you told me about how you want to practice medicine really resonated to me because I've been also in on this journey since I started nurturing all of that for me. And I said, no, this is wonderful. I want to also offer that to my patients. I don't know one particular story, but I can tell you about myself.
Mm-hmm.
I have hope that by spreading these seeds, because they're seeds, I don't know if they're gonna really grow into a plant and then give flower or not, but I am spreading these seeds and I am confident that some of these seeds will grow, will become a little plant and will offer flowers to the world, and together we're transforming the world in a better place. So I would say that hope needs to be deeply rooted in love. So when you really have a strong base in love, that's from where true hope, not momentaneous hope or hope into how things should unfold or things, it's like true hope, deep hope. That's from where it stands. And I am like throwing the seeds around. And as architect in Brazil, he said to one person that interviewed him, he was like, hey, you're planting all these seeds in this garden in Rio de Janeiro, but you're not going to see them in full expression because it takes 100 years for them to give the first flower. And
Yeah.
then he said, but this is not for me. This is for the world. I am happy. I'm sufficiently happy to do what I am supposed to do. I don't expect for me to see the flowers.
This is beautiful. Thank you so much, Leticia. I just want to say this is so exciting to me to see that there's more and more physicians that are discovering mindfulness and loving kindness and practicing for themselves and then sharing it with their patients because it helps them. So I just want to say thank you for sharing your stories. It's not just one story; it's many, and it's just wonderful to hear you. And I hope to that we can have you more often, like on a podcast, because there's so much to unfold here. I think we just touched the surface. But yeah, again, thank you so much. And I'm gonna stop here. Do you want to tell us where we can find you? And of course, I'll put everything in the footnote of the podcast as well as the YouTube video. Do you want to tell us where we can find you?
Okay, so I'm easy to find. So I am on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram. But on Instagram, I am speaking in Portuguese, but I'm there. And I also have a blog where I write about science, scientific methods, gender equity, but I also write in Portuguese. But these are the places you can find me, my
Uh,
thoughts and my ideas.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Leticia. And for the auditors, I just want to say, so I'm Dr. Isabella Meek from Unabridged MD, and I'm a rheumatologist in the Denver area. I'm about to open a direct care practice so that I can really offer the best care that I can offer to my patients because I think that patients deserve it. I also have an opportunity coming up this Friday, the 16th at 9 a.m. for Denver time or 11 a.m. for Eastern time. And we're actually going to discuss exactly those. So we're going to talk about mindfulness, what exercise can do. And we are going to talk about visualization as well. And we're going to talk actually about those techniques, but we're also going to go through the science behind them. Because if you're like me, I needed to know that there was science to truly embrace them. So you can register online and it's on my website, or I'm going to put it also at the end of the footnotes. So thank you so much, and see you next week.
Thank
Take care.
you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.